All right, so here we are, and hello, Suzanne.
Hi there, Adi.
Hi, so my name is Adi Klevit, and I'm the CEO of Business Success Consulting Group. And today I have my very good friend, Suzanne Hanifin from Acument Executive Search. And Suzanne, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. And thank you so much, Adi, for having me here today. I really do appreciate it. So Acument Executive Search has been around since 2007, and we really do exactly what our title is. We do executive placement all over the globe. We've done placements in China to Vietnam to Europe, but it's really about holding culture as our North Star, and we recruit to that culture. And every search is a new search, so we go out and find the people that matches that culture and have the skill sets our clients are looking for.
Great. And she is incredible at what she does, and she has a great team of recruiters working with her. So today we're going to talk about online interviews. That's been the trend. I mean, this is what we need to do instead of the interviewing in person. There's a lot of interviewing online via Zoom, just like the call we are having right now. And obviously you had to pivot the company in terms of like training and coaching people on how to do online interviews. So I decided to interview an expert in that area, which is Suzanne, and you're going to tell us some tips and tricks and things that you've seen that works and don't work. And over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. So yeah, as COVID has continued on, I think most businesses realize key positions or growth positions, they still need to hire. And as you mentioned, Adi, it has all gone virtual. Whether you're in MS Teams, Zoom, whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you use, there really are a lot of tips and trades. I think there's a difference between one-on-one interviewing and team interviewing. And I would love to kind of break that down into two sections because, again, they're really different on the feel and how they work. So
Right.
let's talk about one-on-one interviewing first. Just like we have two of us on our screen today, I'm going to show you with my eyes and body language really the differences that I'm talking about. When I am talking right now, I am basically looking directly at my screen. If I were to look over at you, Adi, then it's looking over and you're only seeing a side of my face. People, when they're interviewing, want to see the entire face, the
Right.
entire expression. And so I really do think it is very, very important to keep that in mind. And one trick to this is it doesn't matter what anybody else's view is. You can change your personal view by upper right hand corner. I had to think which is my left and which is my
Right.
right. Upper right hand corner, you can change that view into speaker view, which then minimizes your box and makes a D's full
Right.
picture. So again, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. As an interviewee, I would highly recommend to put things on speaker or on speaker view.
I agree. I just changed you into speaker view so I can totally see you and I'm looking, because when we were on gallery view, then I'm looking at you. So I find that I'm doing exactly what you said not to do in an interview, is looking at you. So I'm faced this way as opposed to looking straight into the camera, which makes it kind of awkward when you're on gallery view.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you hear so many complaints about it. So let's take this example with a group. When you're on a gallery view, you can have as much as 9 people's little boxes and little faces. And it's instinct that we as people want to turn and acknowledge that person. But again, on video, turning and acknowledging means you're turning away,
Right. I'm looking like
not
this. Yeah.
looking at that person. And so it's much more important to say, okay, we're only going to put things on speaker view. And that forces me to look at the person who's talking because it's the big screen.
I agree.
Yeah. And so, let's talk about these while we're on the group interviews. we have been doing a lot of group interviews, and some have been total disasters, and some have worked really well. And we usually come into a group at being that orchestrator, of being that person who really is that maestro. I guess that's the right word, not orchestrator, but the maestro. And it's one person managing and leading and guiding the conversations. So let's pretend, Adi, that it's you and three others from your team and me. I would, as the maestro, say, welcome candidate, Joe. Joe, today we have, and I do the introductions. People can wave, people can do anything, but they don't speak. Because again, every time they speak, if they're on speaker view, the face is going to show up. And by the time you're on to the next person, it doesn't have enough time to change into that person's face. So then the candidate, Joe, in this example, gets confused on who's talking. So it's really, really important to have one person making those introductions or pausing long enough so the camera catches up with whoever is talking. And so also part of that maestro, it's not only, in doing the introductions, but also assigning questions to each person. So then I would say, okay, Adi, it's your turn. Go ahead and ask Joe your question. And again, if he's on speaker view and everybody else is on speaker view, you have to pause and then let Adi ask her question. So then he realizes now it's Adi that's asking this. So then he can refer back to her on different examples, even 3 questions down. He can go, now what Adi was saying earlier. And you want to help both sides of this. When you're interviewing, you're really looking at, do they have those traits and the behaviors and the characteristics that align with my company's culture? And to get that is to really kind of give them those opportunities to be successful. And that to me is with the pause.
Interesting. Okay, I never thought about that, but that's true. You just pause, and then it's also a cue for the next person to talk. So it's basically, if you're interviewing in a group, you should really talk to your group members ahead of time and figure out who is going to be the one who leads. If, let's say, if you're not on the call as the leader, but it's somebody internally from the company, who is going to be the one who is going to lead the call, and also agree that when you're done talking, you pause and you let enough time to go by, so then before you start talking, for the camera to switch the views.
Absolutely, Adi, that's exactly right.
What do you think about muting? So people should actually stay muted unless they talk?
Absolutely. It's when you're recording, obviously that's super important, just because there's background noise and other distractions in people's lives. But yeah, anytime you are not talking, always hit the mute button. And we can take Zoom as the example. People don't realize you can hit the space bar.
Yeah.
There you go. So now, you hit the space bar and that will mute you. To unmute, it is also the space bar.
Right.
And most people are trying to find their mouse and looking around and going, where's my mute? It's really as simple as hitting that space bar. Yeah. And to again, help with that conversation flow.
Yeah, good. That's great advice. So what other tips you found are successful in interviewing online?
Yeah, so let's do it individual, because it does, mean the same thing as a group interview. I have a horrible habit of using my hands.
Oh, me too, all the time. That's the way we talk.
My hands, I express, I do everything with my hands. And it is so hard for me to have my hands folded in my lap or cross-armed, or sometimes, are you ready for this? I have to sit on my arm.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, yes.
Yes, because again, it just reminds you how distracting that is. And I think it's it's easier for an interviewee, Joe, to use his hands, because I think that helps with the expression
Yeah.
and his excitement. And he's like, I want this job, woo! That we see. But as an interviewer, absolutely not. And when you add 3 other people, 4 other people, we've had one interview that had 8 panelists. It is so distracting that it really causes people to start fidgeting because they're kind of nervous, and they're kind of wanting to make sure that they're reading the room. Putting it off a gallery view will solve that problem. And B, be aware of that. Be aware of how, as an interviewer, it's really distracting. And again, adding multiple people, it's tough.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think, mhm,
So how
yeah.
many people do you think what would be ideal on an online call, on an online interview? How many people do you think is ideal? What would be the maximum that you would recommend in terms of a group interview?
So, like I said, we did one real recently with 8, and I do think that's too much. The interview lasted 2 hours. By the time everybody asked, their 3 questions and the answers. And I always recommend, whether it's in person or not, how much time you allocate. Half of it should be you asking your questions as an interviewer, half should be the interviewee asking their questions. And with that, you really do get a good sense of the type of person. So, like I said, having this maestro, if it's over 2 people, is critical, because they're guiding that flow, they're guiding the tempo, but also having that maestro to say, okay, Joe, now what are your questions? And then Joe can say, okay, Adi, I know you answered this already. What about this person? And then you can also see how that
Right.
candidate is taking control. And I don't mean taking control, but has that confidence to ask very specific questions to a specific person. And I think you glean so much about a person of how prepared they are to come into an interview, how strategic are the questions versus how tactical they are. Um, there's a lot of interactions, and you want to make sure you're seeing that side of it and you're just not asking questions. Does that make sense, Adi?
Absolutely, makes total sense. Yes, yes. So what are your thoughts about online interviews? Do you think they are more effective, less effective as in person?
I think they're less effective. I think we get a lot from body language. So let's talk about body language for a minute. There's a big difference, and you see it when you're interviewing in person. Somebody who sits back, somebody who's kind of like not 100% engaged. In online, it's hard. Let's say I started this conversation sitting back. You can't tell if I'm less engaged, more engaged, that we get when we see people.
Right.
But it's these, subtle cues. And it's mainly about eye placement that you really see on Zoom. And I think much more on video than you do in real life, because we're not just staring at people's eyes,
Right.
or facial expressions. We're kind of reading them as a holistic thing, from foot tap, twitter of the fingers, you're seeing all of this. But when it comes to Zoom, we're really limited usually from here up. So how do you read this subtly? And I've actually read a lot of different articles on that. And when people think, their eyes go up, their head tilts, there's a lot of information out there to really understand these different cues. And but again, I think the big one is really this engagement and the fiddling and the fitching, because people are never comfortable just to sit there and look at a camera and kind of
It's true.
Yeah,
That's
be the
true. You see,
person.
like I'm moving right now, right? Or if I want to do some, yeah, totally. But I guess it's, you can see if a person is being natural or not. I mean, when you're engaged, obviously you lean forward. So I'm leaning forward right now, not force, if I'm interested in something, I find myself doing a lot of Zoom calls, obviously. And if I'm interested, I will lean more forward, right? Or I listen as opposed to somebody sitting here and not interested. That's the difference you're talking about. And you have to know how to read that and see that, right?
Absolutely. And again, it's tough when you're only, you know, shoulder and above
Yeah,
looking at someone. There's not a lot of those cues. So to prepare for that interview, again, I think it's really important to say these are upfront with either by yourself or a group of people to say, these are the characteristics that are so important to me and my team. And you interview and you watch for those specific characteristics versus just listening to their response. So I think the reason why people today are, more and more zoomed out, it takes so much more to do these interviews online than they do in person because you have to be watching all these things and you're reading into them and you're trying to figure how somebody ticks virtually.
right, right. Makes total sense. Wow, this is very informative, very good. Anything else in closing? Any other tips that you can think of?
No, I mean, I said it earlier. I think being prepared.
Right.
To using the pause. It's we've all done it. We've all talked on each other, over each other, through each other, as we're getting used to using Zoom. And pause, again, I can't talk enough about it. People are uncomfortable with pauses. But I think as we are going more and more virtual, more and more interviews online, using that pause as really a key method to controlling the conversation.
Right.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would love to really also talk about is, no matter who you're hiring, knowing your culture, knowing your vision, your mission, and these key characteristics, once you identify those, it's so much easier to find that or to eliminate people and say, you know what, they may have the best skill set in the world, but they don't have what my team, my organization needs. And so again, it's about being prepared and knowing what you're looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it seems like now in the online world, you have to be more prepared than ever than in person, where you can actually, just by a conversation or by being there, you can somehow figure out how, if you're not prepared, how to get by. But here you have to be fully prepared. So I'm talking with my hands as I'm explaining that. I should be
I know.
explaining like this, but
But you want to because you're excited about it. And
that's
I think
right.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also super excited about talking to you about other topics. Last week we talked about efficiency, and our next topic is going to be about onboarding, which is a huge subject right now in terms of like, how do you onboard, especially in a virtual world? If you're working from home and you're onboarding somebody who works from home, how do you onboard an employee correctly, successfully? So we're going to discuss that next in our next episode of Adi and Suzanne, or Suzanne and Adi. So I'm excited about that. And all of your contact information will be right here in the video, so people can contact you, ask you questions, right? I mean, anything that has to do with hiring. Suzanne is the expert, so absolutely. All right, well, thank you so much, Suzanne. It was very, very informative, and we'll talk next time.
All right. Thank you.